when I think of a hero, I think of the community members who aren't perfect, who have a past, who have a history, and are just trying to make ends meet like everybody else in Minneapolis.
A lot of crisis, harm, and crime, I would say, arises out of a lack of resource or a need not being met.
You know, we were already, shortchanged with resources, and then we were indoctrinated and corrupted to believe that the only way to survive was to feed off of each other.
Well, first, no baby is born a savage. There's a narrative around our kids that they're savages and they're just terrorists and they just want to loot and steal and all these things. But if we really do a deep dive, a lot of the kids don't have resources. A lot of the kids, even us in our own community, we walk past them and get away from them, and we treat them the same way, unfortunately, instead of having a conversation with them. And some I've found, they want to talk.
Like the saying, when a kid comes into school and you're wondering why they can't learn, why they're not able to focus on the lesson for the day, 9 times out of 10 is because they're thinking about how hungry they are. They're thinking about the trauma they just left at home. It's the same thing when a person gets out of prison. You tell them, go ahead and be a productive citizen in society. But yet they don't know where they're gonna sleep tonight. They don't know what they're gonna eat, how they're gonna sustain themselves.
It's hard for whites to see racism because they live in a bubble and the disparities keep them in the bubble. And unless we break our bubbles and go outside our bubbles, they'll always be. Because it's too comfortable for whites, the way it is. And it's hard for them to have empathy inside that bubble.
We have lack of resources, but we also have to understand in our community, we are the resource.
I would say my biggest role in the community so far has been to be on the front lines of the fight for Black lives. I also have been involved in the network of mutual aid work that has been going on the ground here in Minneapolis. One of the biggest initiatives that we helped out with was to provide aid and supplies to the houseless community, which has been a very, very, very imminent issue here in Minneapolis. What mutual aid looks like, in my view, is the people coming to fill those gaps. So my personal vision with mutual aid has been to give resources to the most vulnerable, because when our most vulnerable are respected, protected, and taken care of, that is a way of prevention.
So because we're given these resources, brothers are able to find their place back in their community in a dignified manner. They're given hope that, there is a different way from the way they've been taught that there is. And so by taking some of those burdens off of people's shoulders when they're coming home, as far as the resources that we're lacking, but also helping them relearn what it means to be a brother, a friend, a community member. It's how we push back against these oppressive systems. What we do is we provide housing services, we provide health care services, we provide hygiene, clothing, tickets, as far as for rides. If a person is trying to get their license and they have tickets or fines that need to be paid, we will, write a stipend for that. So any little thing that is a barrier to successful re-entry, successfully navigating a world that they have left for 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years, we uplift that.
During my experience volunteering at George Floyd Square, sometimes it was traumatizing, and I actually had witnessed a murder. And after that, my mother suggested that I go to therapy. It helped me really put into words and into thoughts, honestly, how I really feel, and it made it easier to be vulnerable with people and talk about that, how I was really feeling. So after just seeing how that experience helped me so much, like in my personal life, I wanted all the people in my community to have access to mental health the way that I was, fortunate enough to. I wouldn't consider therapists like a first responder, but I would consider them more on the end of like prevention, because I felt like if more people sat down with the therapist and talked out their past and, you know, developed better coping mechanisms with their demons instead of like taking it out on the people they love or their community members, there'd be a lot less 911 calls and a safer environment for the community all around.
I've never had a problem with police. As a boy, growing up in the 1940s and 1950s, I was taught the policeman is your friend. Particularly white people, and we tend to live in a segregated society in terms of our neighborhoods. I mean, and most white people live in predominantly white neighborhoods, and so I think they are treated differently in their own neighborhoods. And certainly the violence and the assumption of guilt and the profiling that seems to be done by police, I think is a major problem for people of color.
The police does not make me feel safe. The police have never made me feel safe. The police have always made me feel that I was vulnerable, that I wasn't safe, that I was only inches or seconds away from being harmed or abused, because that's what typically the police have done to me.
That is no real fault of any individual, but the system of policing and the constant work that goes into it is constantly seeing people at their very worst. In doing that work, you then create a narrative in your mind that tells you that people are inherently harmful.
I've literally seen police sitting right here, a shooting happened right here, and they don't even roll up until the shooting stops.
They're not, you know, actively working to keep anyone safe. It's more like they're actively working to keep you restricted, confined in a certain area and move in a certain way, keep us in a certain neighborhood, make sure we're only hurting in our area.
More recently, I was thinking it's kind of like COVID. We don't know where that bug is and when it will engage us, but we know it's out there. We know it's lethal. Well, that's how it must be for people of color in terms of their contact with police. They don't know if it's a bad apple or not. They don't know what will happen if they get engaged. They don't know what would happen if they're unjustly accused and they end up in the system. It's totally at risk. And that's just wrong for people to have to live that way. To live with that kind of stress is cruel.
The reason why I decided to organize the barbershops and use them as a platform to create protagonists and community development leadership is because I started noticing in the barbershops is where disenfranchised people feel most powerful. So when people come inside the barbershops, we lawyers, we sports analysts, we politicians, and you hear brothers and sisters speaking with more confidence inside that space. And then when I started understanding the capitalism and white supremacy, I started understanding like, well, that makes sense, because most of the time when we as black people step outside our doors, we're stripped of everything publicly. But when we're around each other, community, that's when we actually feel our most powerful. So the barbershop is safe in a way where people can actually be who they are.
In the middle of a crisis or when something is urgent, it's really hard to remember that perhaps Aunt Sally is a person who can help you de-escalate. Sometimes it's hard to remember that your neighbor next door really, knows how to make you laugh. Sometimes it's hard to remember that, your cousin is a person who can, make everybody feel comfortable.
People are not actually hearing each other. If you have domestic issues where people are not hearing each other, I feel equipped to relate to my brothers and sisters. I feel like I have the wisdom to talk to people about exactly what's going on. I think I have the skill set of listening to people that I can actually introduce people to. I know how to check brothers and sisters' temperatures. I've been out here a long time. I know how to address people. I know how to preserve my brothers and sisters' dignity and respect when I'm talking to them, even if I'm displeased about some of the actions or what's going on.
A lot of people don't know this, but right after World War II, I think it was through the United Nations, they declared a universal declaration of human rights. but it begins with the basics. You know, everyone has a right to housing. Everyone has a right to earn, you know, a decent income that will, where they'll feel secure. Everyone has a right to health care. Everyone has a right to education. Everyone has a right to have a decent roof over their head. Everyone has a right to be free from violence. All of those things are factors that contribute to people in a community feeling safe. It's not just the absence of overt violence, but there are many underlying factors that we need to address as well.
Things that actually make the community safe is a willingness to actually engage each other intentionally. So what I mean by that is people who wake up with the mission to say, I'm gonna speak to somebody today. I'm gonna get to know this brother right here who's been 2 houses down from me for years and I've never spoke to him before. More intention on the calendar around the community coming together for no reason and no holiday, just because you want to get to know each other in your community. Conversation, intentional engaging, and then actually making that part of a culture where you now have the kids do the same thing that you're doing.
I think, you know, initially, like most people, I get this image of a comic book character dressed in, you know, superhero outfit. But I know that there are everyday heroes. I think hero is this person who's willing to go in, sometimes making sacrifices for themselves, for their own well-being, to making sure that everybody else is, you know, doing okay.
You know, I shy away from heroes because I think in our society we make celebrities out of a few people. And who knows who's going to hit the jackpot, you know. But for me, a hero is a person who steps out of their comfort zone and is willing to open up their perspectives and listen to other perspectives. A hero really is an inclusive person who works in coalition with others. I don't think an individual can be a hero, really. I mean, they try, and our society certainly encourages that. We expect a hero to come along and fix it, and I think we need a multitude of heroes.
Because everybody's a leader. God has given all of us something that we're good at, and we need to tap into that and come together and build a united front.